Hey there, and welcome to Insomnia Chills. Tonight, I've gathered a collection of creature encounters and strange wilderness stories accounts from people who ventured deep into the woods and came back with experiences they still can't explain. So whether you're getting ready for sleep, relaxing after a long day, or listening in the middle of the night, settle in and make yourself comfortable. If you're enjoying the stories, consider leaving a like and subscribing for more chilling stories. And let me know in the comments, where are you listening from? And what time is it there right now? Now dim the lights, get comfortable, and let's head into the wilderness. I was in prison for 15 years. There was a skinwalker in there with us. A little background first. I was serving a 15-year sentence in a penitentiary in southern Arizona. What I was in there for isn't important. During my stay there were countless things that happened that no one could explain, and even more that no one wanted to know more about. It all started with a prison legend. Supposedly, years ago, something awful and unexplainable happened in the prison. Every morning, we'd be woken up and expected to stand near the front of our cells, while guards visually confirmed we were present and accounted for. Apparently, about a year before I got sent there, the most brutal and unexplainable thing happened during one of these routines. A man who had a cell to himself looked very off during this check. When a guard pulled over another guard to help him check it out, they found it wasn't actually the prisoner they were expecting at all. It was a totally different man. This man was wearing the skin of the other man over himself, loosely fitting, draped over him. Apparently, he looked like a real monster. The scariest thing, though, was that the guy wearing the skin was not an inmate. They had no idea how he even got into prison, let alone into a cell. What's worse is that they couldn't even figure out who he was. He wasn't documented anywhere. And what's worse than that? They never even found the body of the man whose skin he was wearing. Pretty grisly stuff, I know. And I realize that's not the go-to definition of a skinwalker, but that's what the prison called him, the Skinwalker. It didn't help that the guy never talked, apparently. Anyway, that's what started the whole Skinwalker superstition around the yard. Apparently, the guy got shipped to a different spot about a month after it happened, and just about everyone in Gen Pop felt all the better for it. I heard about the story on the second day of my stay. A heck of a story to hear and place in your home for the foreseeable future. Now on to the real stuff, though. Sure, that guy was the Skinwalker, but all he did in the long run was get an old lifer Navajo inmate to tell everyone about actual skinwalkers. It seemed like a lot of the prison culture actually revolved around them. Now, apparently, skinwalkers are tricky to point out on the spot, but if you manage to survive around one for more than a minute or two, almost everyone can tell the mannerisms are all off. They can mimic human speech, but not replicate it. They twitch manically. They have an unnatural gait while walking. But apparently, they got better with experience. The old Navajo guy, his name was Carl, said that he was sure there was an actual one among the prisoners, slowly picking us off over the years. He called it the Grand Master Skinwalker at one point. Apparently, he thought it had human mannerisms down so well that you might not even be able to tell if it was your cellmate for a day or two. It had to be good, he posited one night. He would expect a skinwalker to jump at any opportunity for a kill, but this one realized it had a revolving door of people to kill coming to it and masterfully bided its time, as Carl thought, for years. A lot of guys found humor in it. A lot more were really on edge about it. Every once in a while in prison, people snap. Sometimes you'll find your cellmate swinging in front of your bunk, strung up around the neck by his pant leg. Sometimes you just can't take it anymore. But in our yard, people tended to snap in a very special way. It wouldn't be an outburst at dinner or a silent suicide in the night. Guys would just stop talking, hunch over and shuffle around. Any friendships they had would be mostly out the window. They would turn into a loner during rec time. They would let their hair hang in front of their face. No one liked to talk about it. Like if they did, it would happen to them next. I felt the same way. I didn't know if it was a skinwalker or just people going crazy. But I didn't want to find out. It wasn't clockwork or anything. But every time someone snapped in this way, it wasn't more than a couple of weeks before they were shipped off or transferred to God knows where, without anyone else knowing beforehand. Then there were the nighttime occurrences. Short, loud bursts of sound echoed through my cell block during all hours of the night on a regular basis. It sounded like a mix between a pig's dying squeals and nails on a chalkboard. Just another thing no one liked to talk about. Even scarier were the shadows and footsteps. The block was dimly illuminated at night by a few lights hanging from the ceiling outside the cells. I myself saw shadows flit across my walls on a regular basis when there were definitely no guards near my cell. One time, near the end of my sentence, I woke up, looked at my back wall, and found a perfect silhouette of a person standing there. But when I looked, my bunkmate was asleep, and no one was outside my cell. And the footsteps. Everyone hated the freaking footsteps. They were the scariest part. In the night, sometimes more rarely than the shadows, you would hear ungodly fast footsteps. They sounded like wet feet slapping on a tile floor. Whatever caused them would fly from one end of the block to the other in a dead sprint. Whatever it was inhumanly fast. If you happened to be awake before it started, by the time you heard the footsteps on one side of your cell and whipped your head around to see the thing run by, it sounded like it was 3 cells past you. Everyone hated the footsteps. I agreed. I thought they were the worst. I was released from that place about a month ago, and I have more stories than I can count. I swear it was nearly my turn. About a week before I was discharged, my cellmate and a good friend of mine snapped in the same kind of way. I didn't sleep for an entire week. Well, I did sleep, of course, but never for more than a few minutes at a time. Never turned my back on the guy. The scariest thing? I woke up one night to him somehow snaking his body through the bars of our cell. For reference, I couldn't get anything past my shoulder through them. The worst part, though, was that he was coming back into our cell. On the day of my release, I didn't say a word to him. Just left. He seemed fine with it. So was I. I had made it through. 15 years of prison fights, gang disputes, and for all I know, Skinwalker abductions. I left through the front gates, a free man. As I walked along the fence for the rec yard, I spotted my cellmate standing off on his own, like he had for the last week or so. I shook my head, not even really sure if it was him anymore. I took one last look over the yard, this time from the other side of the fence. I wish I hadn't. There, standing off on his own, on the other side of the yard, was Carl, slouched over, eyeing the other inmates and twitching manically. When I was young, I lived on a farm in rural Oregon with my parents. I was an only child. We weren't a big commercial farm, just a family type thing. We had 5 cows, 3 horses, a small herd of goats, 2 dogs, and 1 chicken coop. We also had some Indian runner ducks we kept mostly as pets. We didn't really make any money off the place, just enough to sustain the animals and a little extra for ourselves. Money enough to take a decent vacation every couple of years. Dad had his other job in town as an insurance agent. He was the only one around, really. The town wasn't more than about 1,500 people. Mom gave horse riding lessons as well. We weren't rich, but we were comfortable. It was really an easy life, or at least it could have been a lot worse. I went to school. Dad went to work. Mom took care of the animals. Then we all had dinner together every night, and I would go to bed while Mom and Dad had a beer or two and watch the news. Sometimes at night, I would hear things outside, mostly just normal stuff. The cows or horses would get spooked by a coyote or something, or I would hear the dogs chasing a rabbit, barking their heads off. Every once in a great while, we would find a chicken dead. Dad would always tell me about it, but never let me see the body, although I asked frequently. He would keep Mom and me inside until he had gone out, did whatever he did with the body, threw sawdust over any blood, and then life would go on as normal. I assumed it was foxes, as I had seen a couple of them out in the pasture over the years, slinking around back and forth through the grass. The summer when I was 10 years old, I remember helping Mom change the bedding in the horse stalls when we heard a huge racket going on outside. If you've never heard the sounds of a horse in pain, you don't want to. Trust me. It sounds almost like a person screaming. Well, that's what we heard, and one of our horses, the Palomino, came running into the barn with a wound on its left thigh. 4 long marks, like claw marks, ran across its body for about a foot. It had blood running down its leg and was limping. I was so scared by the sight of that much blood that Mom locked the horse in a stall and made me go inside with one of the dogs. She told me to lock the door and stay inside until she came in to get me. I did. Eventually, Mom came inside and told me that the horse had hurt itself on the barbed wire that ran the perimeter of the pasture. We owned more land beyond that, but it was mostly forested. I guess I believed her at the time, but at dinner that night, I noticed Dad was being particularly quiet, and Mom was talking a lot more than she normally did. She was being really animated, and I noticed that Dad had gotten his rifle out and set it by the back door. Usually, he only did that when the coyotes had been acting up. That night, I went to bed as normal, but I had trouble falling asleep. I turned on my desk lamp and decided to read comic books until I got tired. I have a very vivid memory of reading Uncanny X-Men and hearing the back door open. Looking out, I could see my dad by the porch light, lighting a cigarette and holding his rifle under his arm. He started walking over to the driveway and then turned to follow the fence line. I couldn't sleep until I knew Dad was back safe. I kept coming downstairs with the excuse of getting water to see if Dad was back in the house yet, and each time, all I saw was Mom sitting on the couch in the living room, staring at a blank TV screen and looking worried, sighing occasionally. Eventually, about 4 in the morning, I think, Dad did come back, and I was so tired and relieved that I fell asleep as soon as I knew he was home. He never told me what he did that night, but I never thought to ask. 2 months later, I was back in school. It rains a lot in Oregon in the fall, and this day was no different. All I could hear from my bedroom was rain hitting the ground and the aluminum roof of the chicken coop. There was light thunder in the distance, but it was slowly getting closer. I thought I had heard a coyote yapping out around the garage, or it could have been one of the dogs. I looked out, straining my eyes to see whatever there may have been. In a brief and distant lightning flash, I saw something. It looked almost like a person, but hunched over and with a long torso. It was tall, taller than Dad, who was a good 6'4" at least. I just barely caught a glimpse of it on the near side of the garage. Then the light faded, and I didn't see it again that night. There was another dead chicken the next morning, the third in just as many weeks. I told Dad what I had seen the previous night. The color went out of his cheeks momentarily, until he told me that the storm must have been playing tricks on me. I accepted that. 4 months after that, we lost a cow. It was in the middle of the night, and we all woke up at the same time. There was a lot of noise in the pasture, but only briefly. The cry of a dying animal and a primitive, guttural yell that I had never heard before. Dad rushed up to my room. I could hear him running up the stairs. He had his rifle in hand and opened my door. He saw I was awake and told me to stay inside no matter what and try to go back to sleep. I don't think I have to say that sleep wasn't really an option any longer, but I did stay in my room with a blanket held tight around my shoulders and staring out the window. Probably about 10 minutes later, I heard gunshots in the field. I don't know what he was shooting at, whether it was whatever had attacked the cow or the cow itself, trying to put the animal out of its misery. Dad rarely, if ever, talked about that night. I later found out that he had gotten to the cow, only to find it ripped open on the ground bleeding out from its torso. The shots I heard were him shooting the cow in the head. It kept going like that. For years. A chicken or a duck here and there. Something bigger, only very rarely. It sounds absurd, but I almost came to think of it as commonplace. I only ever caught glimpses of the thing until what comes next. It terrified me. It happened in the middle of the day, over the course of a long weekend, when my parents had gone to Seattle to see my uncle, who was ill. It was on a Saturday afternoon. I was 17 years old. I was out in the barn putting out food for the horses and the dogs. The horses were running around out in the pasture, and the dogs were asleep in the corner of one of the horse stalls. I heard something rustling in the tall grass outside in the pasture. The dogs looked around a little bit, but didn't seem to mind. I assumed it was just one of the horses, waiting for me to leave so they could eat. I kept going about what I was doing, and in several minutes, I thought I heard breathing. I turned to look, and it was standing in the doorway, tall as heck, even hunched over. The sun was streaming in behind it, lighting up all the dust in the air around it like some kind of sickly halo. It was looking at me, considering me. Maybe it was trying to decide whether or not I was food. I remember swearing, turning, and running as fast as I could for the house, not even thinking. Panic causing my legs to move. It was behind me, not even breathing hard. I heard its feet hitting the ground in a constant rhythm. I got to the house, opened the door, slammed it behind me, and locked it as fast as I could. I tore through the house, locking every door and drawing the blinds on every window. I could hear it snarling outside the back door. The dogs were barking at it, but they wouldn't try to attack the thing. It was too big, and they knew it. It roared at the dogs, and they ran off, probably to hide in the pasture. I went to my parents' bedroom and got Dad's rifle. I loaded it, set up a chair in the living room facing the back door, and waited. It started prowling around the house. I could hear its feet crunching on the gravel of the driveway and the wooden planks of the back deck. It kept walking back and forth. I thought about trying to look through a window to see it, but I was too scared. Eventually, after hours of hoping it would go away, the sun went down. I turned on all of the outside lights and went up to my room. I opened my window, with the rifle in my hands, hoping to be able to pick the thing off from above. I saw it lurking just beyond the glow from the porch light. It had long, sinewy arms and walked on bent knees. It was by the chicken coop. Then it disappeared from view. I heard the chickens squawking and screeching. The thing reappeared with a dead, bloody chicken in its hands. It bit off one of the wings with jaws that were dripping with slime and drool and let the dead bird drop to the ground at its feet. Then it looked at me. Its eyes made contact with mine. It turned away again, back to the chickens. It came back with another bird, mutilated it in front of me, and dropped it. It went back again. And again. I should have taken a shot at it, but I was astounded and confused, trying to figure out what it was doing. Then it hit me. It was a show of power. It was showing me that it was stronger than me, that it could do whatever it wanted, because I couldn't stop it. At the same time, I felt powerless and sickened. Powerless because what it was saying was true. If it was just that thing in me, I wouldn't stand a chance. Sickened because I realized what kind of intelligence it would need to be able to convey that message. The thought shook me out of my stupor, and I remembered the rifle at my side. It was heading back to the chickens, and I decided that when it came back, I would take my shot. It strode back to the porch, almost arrogant, walking on bent knees with those arms, so long that the chicken was nearly dragging on the ground. I raised the rifle to my eye and tried to steady myself. My heart was beating so hard, I could see the rifle shaking ever so slightly in rhythm. With each heartbeat I could hear pounding in my own ears. It raised the body to its mouth, and just as it was about to put the chicken's head inside, I squeezed the trigger. The crack of the gun echoed in the now shattered quiet of the nighttime standoff, and I heard it howl. a painful, loud, startled howl. I had hit it on the outside of the shoulder. It ran off into the night. I never saw it again. It was still out there, though. It still killed chickens and other things, more often than before. I'm writing all of this now because my parents died 3 weeks ago. They were killed in a collision with a drunk driver. He survived. They left me the farm, and I intend to live here with my own family. I'm 32 now, and I work for an Oregon Fish and Game office in Salem. I'm married to a wonderful woman named Stephanie. We have one son, Zachary, who is 4 years old. We are expecting a daughter in 4 months. I've come to the farmhouse alone today. I told Steph that I just wanted some time alone in my parents' house to deal with some emotions. She was very understanding. I've come back to claim what is rightfully mine. I have Dad's rifle next to me on the table, and it is almost dusk. I've also brought several portable halogen lights to set up around the house, and my own shotgun. I'm borrowing a handgun from Joe, a guy at Fish and Game whom I work with. When I am done typing this account of my memories, I will print it out and leave it on the dining room table, along with my wedding ring and my key to the safe deposit box where my will is kept. Everything is loaded and ready. Hopefully, I will return here to collect these things, and nobody will ever know I wrote this. Steph, in the event that you are the unfortunate soul to find this, which I'm terrified to think seems a likely outcome, the thought of you having to go on alone hurts me more than anything in this world ever can. Know that I love you more than anything, and I hope you understand that I am doing this to keep you safe. Zachary, I love you and can only hope you grow up to be a good, kind-hearted, and strong man like your grandfather was. To my unborn daughter, if I don't live long enough to meet you, it will be the single greatest regret of my life. Tell the police. Tell Fish and Game. Call Joe. He's one of the few people who knows about this. Make this situation known. Eventually, someone will kill it, even if it isn't me. Goodbye for now. There's only 5 of us on this camping trip. We keep counting 6. There were bright flashes of red in the sky. It's as if someone was waving around a flare light from space faint, but noticeable. We all made UFO jokes and laughed as we nailed our tents into the ground. I knew for sure that there were 5 of us. We had all been friends since early middle school and were celebrating our high school graduation with this getaway camping trip. The flashes of red must have stopped randomly as we made conversation while fixing up our tents. Dave managed to put his tent together the fastest and told us he was going to find some branches for the fire. I remember how he had worked with me at the local gas station last year. We used to do the night shift together, and it had made working at a desolate gas station much more fun than it was supposed to be. There was also Eric in the corner, still reading his tent manual and fidgeting with his signature round glasses. I wasn't as close with Eric as I was with the others, but I still remember sitting with him in math class and copying his homework one time. Ava was also there talking with Sally, my cousin. Both had decided to team up and work on one tent at a time. I also have clear memories of them hanging around at school in our usual places. In fact, I even knew Ava's younger brother, as he used to beg to go with us wherever we went. I bring all this up because I'm sure that there were 5 of us, including me, and that I knew everyone in the group. So Dave had gone to get some branches as we pulled out some foldable chairs and set them up around the fire pit. I remember feeling uneasy as the sun set and darkness began to consume the forest. The shadows of trees elongated around us as the minutes ticked by. Eric went to get a flashlight from his bag, while we wondered what was taking Dave so long. He appeared soon after, the harsh rustling sounds of the bushes signifying his return. We were all buried in our chairs at this point, covered by our jackets. The temperature had dropped quickly, and a slight breeze was beginning to pick up. "Geez, you guys weren't even bothered to pull out a chair for me," Dave said, as he arranged all the branches in the pit. We had set up 5 chairs around the fire. I tried to rationalize the situation, but no matter how hard I focused, My head felt like it was underwater. I had perfect clarity up until that moment, but when I tried to focus on why 5 chairs were occupied, when Dave hadn't sat down yet, my head seemed to just stop working, as if something was reaching in and pulling out my thoughts. Instinctively, I felt even more uneasy now, and I had placed why. The whole forest had gone dead silent. I looked around at the faces of the others and could tell that they had felt the same. Eric was fidgeting with his fingers, trying to scan around the group and spot the extra person, but it was futile. I scanned every face, each etched in worry and frowning in frustration, except for, "It's all right. I'll get the chair myself," Dave said, breaking the silence and somewhat alleviating the tension. I got up and offered to help him. He looked into my eyes and nodded knowingly. We headed away from the fire pit toward the tents, but I kept my eyes glued on our group. "How many people are here?" I whispered to Dave as he looked around and realized that we had indeed only packed 5 chairs. In fact, every person had brought their own chair. They were heavy to carry, and we wouldn't bring any extra needlessly. "There's 5, right?" "I mean, there's 5 chairs," Dave replied. His voice wavered as he spoke. "No, I just think maybe one of us forgot our chair," I said. My mind was struggling to address the issue head on, and now sought to find rational excuses instead. I didn't quite feel in control of my thoughts. It felt like swimming in a dream, and if I tried to force myself to think about who the 6th person was, my head would begin to throb. "Yeah, that sounds about right, actually," Dave said, relaxing and heading back to the group. When we walked back to the fire pit and circle of chairs, 2 chairs were empty. One for me and one for Dave. Everything was adding up now, even though we all agreed it wasn't before. Sally suggested we were all probably tired after the long hike to get here and probably just needed some sleep. She could have been right. We were all sleep deprived from waking up very early today to make it on time. Ava brought out the drinks. The whole 6-pack was emptied. We all moved closer to the crackling fire for warmth as we took sips from our cans and reminisced on memories of last year. Ava was in the middle of telling us about that one time she was home alone with weird things happening in her house when I got these sudden chills despite the pleasant warmth of the fire. What felt cozy and safe moments ago felt wrong now, all because I realized that there was a crucial detail I missed. Who started the fire? I asked, completely interrupting Ava in the middle of her story and breaking everyone else's immersion. Everyone looked momentarily annoyed until they realized they had no answer. Once again, I scanned the faces staring back at me, all barely illuminated by the light from the fire, all familiar and pale from fear. "Wasn't it you, Dave?" Eric asked. Dave shook his head. "I think the person standing behind Jenny did it," Sally said, looking over at me. I whipped my head around so quickly it hurt. My heart was pounding in my ears. There was nothing behind me except for the encompassing darkness of the woods. Staring at those tall, dark trees behind me made me feel exposed. I felt like a lost bird in a vast field. "Wait, I mean, I don't know," Sally said. Her eyes had gone wide, and she was shaking visibly. She continued to look around frantically as Ava moved over to her, placing her hands on her shoulders and trying to calm her down. "I think we should leave this place," Ava stuttered. "Yeah, something just doesn't feel right, but I can't put my finger on it," Dave said. "But it's so dark out in the forest now. We'd probably get lost if we leave now," someone else said. "Yeah, I think we should stay the night and leave as soon as we can tomorrow," Eric agreed. I tried to protest, but realized Eric was right. The woods harbored an oppressive darkness within which navigation would be near impossible. "Let's not sleep in our separate tents, just to be safe," Sally said. We all agreed. We had only brought 1-person tents with us, but we could squeeze 2 if we tried. That way, no one would be alone at night. Following this conversation, we all got up and made our pairs. I went with Dave, and Sally, as always, went with Ava. Eric kept complaining that he didn't have a pair, but we reassured him he did. He wouldn't accept it. I feel like at some point we all realized that there were only 5 of us, and suddenly we were all huddling up in the middle of the clearing. "Why do we keep thinking there are 6 of us here?" Eric asked. Sweat was dripping down his face despite the cold. We had nearly left him all alone under the assumption that there was another person. My stomach turned as I squeezed my eyes shut and tried to mentally recap everyone here. My head throbbed, but I kept pushing it. There's me, Dave, Eric, Ava, Sally, and I was pointing at each of them as I said the name. I retched and emptied the contents of my stomach on the ground when I got past Sally. The left side of my head felt like there was a knife stuck in it. My vision was blurry. Dave held me up to stop me from collapsing, and we all wordlessly started to move toward the tents as someone put the fire out. Dave helped me into a tent, while the 4 outside discussed what to do. I could only focus on snippets of the conversation as the excruciating pain beating against my skull came and went in waves. Sally had the brilliant idea of arranging 3 tents together so their openings faced together at right angles in a sort of U shape so we could sleep as close as possible and also limit the entrance to our tents. Dave was about to go help as they worked outside, but I clutched his hand and asked him to stay with me. The tents took some time to arrange. I started to feel a bit better once everyone got settled into their tents. A quick head count confirmed there were 5 of us. Eric would have to sleep in his tent alone, but he was more comfortable with it since all the tents were very close now. Looking back now, I think he was just trying to put on a brave face for us. I regret that moment deeply, letting him sleep in his tent alone. He was always less integrated into our group and knew that none of us would pair with him. Just before going to bed, we all agreed to leave as soon as the sun rose in the morning. I remember taking one last look outside the tent into the forest before trying to fall asleep. The wind had picked up, and the tree branches were swaying gently. Beyond our clearing was just pure darkness. It felt like the trees were closing in on me. With the faint moonlight illuminating our clearing, I turned my head to look over at the 2 tents we had left out and saw someone standing next to them. Despite the circumstances, sleep came quickly and easily. Ava's shrill scream woke me up in the middle of the night. Dave and I ripped our tent door open to find Sally and Ava looking into Eric's tent. We pushed them aside. Eric's sleeping bag was rolled up. He was still inside it, his head in the center, face contorted in utter agony. The rest of his body rolled around it, with the blue fabric now dripping with dark blood. Dave zipped up the door of the tent. Ava was in shock. Her eyes had become glassy and unfocused. Sally was shaking her repeatedly, tears streaming down her face. Dave picked up his flashlight and yelled at us to get up and run. We left the campsite behind and entered the trail we had come from. The 5 of us huddled together, Dave leading in the front as he cast his weak flashlight over the path so we could see it. All we had to help us get through this 2-hour trail was a small white circle of light. Even the moon failed to illuminate our surroundings through the dense foliage. Ava tripped and fell, twisting her ankle. We came to a stop. Someone said they knew how to splint it, so we could keep going. They dragged her into the woods instead. It happened too quickly for any of us to process. Sally was about to run after Ava when Dave held her back. She struggled and managed to free herself, running into the trees to follow the echoes of Ava's screams. I was about to run after her, but Dave held me by the shoulders and shook me hard. "We need to get out of here, Jenny. Please," he said. I hesitated, but jolted into motion again when Sally's voice was cut off abruptly. She had been calling out Ava's name as she ran after her. Dave and I continued to run down the trail, trying to get to our car so we could get out of here. There was nothing we could do. At some point, there were 3 of us running on the trail, Dave and I shoulder to shoulder while someone followed us closely behind. "Dave, "Who's behind us?" I gasped. My heart was threatening to burst through my rib cage, and my legs burned. He turned to look at me. Confusion transformed into fear on his face, and then into rage. "You keep running," he told me as he produced a pocket knife from his pants. He handed me the car keys, which I nearly dropped. Then he turned around suddenly and jumped at whoever was behind us. I continued to run in fear as the sounds of a struggle grew behind me. I tripped and tumbled through the trail for what felt like hours. I didn't allow myself to stop. I almost cried when the trail ended, and I walked out into the familiar parking lot. Not wasting a second, I ran to the car and started it up, accelerating out of that forest and onto the highway within mere seconds. I'm typing this post out at a rest stop. My phone has finally regained service, and I've called 911 to try and explain the situation. I don't think they believe my version of events, but they sent a car my way regardless. As I wait, the sun is finally starting to rise. After I hit the post button on this, I'm going to check why the person in my back seat has been so silent the whole time. I used to work night security at a zoo. "Darn dirty apes," Ronnie cursed into the radio. "What's going on out there?" I asked, giving his quote a chuckle. I could hear the shrieking of the baboons in the background. The storm came down worse than the pretty weather girl said on the television earlier that night. In fact, it was the complete opposite. The wind gusts blew through the zoo, accompanied by torrents of cold, thick rain. She said it was supposed to become a drizzle in the next couple of hours, yet it was intensifying. They're really agitated tonight. "I don't know what the heck is wrong with them," Ronnie answered back. "Must be the storm. It's probably going to get worse before it gets better. Animals have a sixth sense about them, you know. They know when the mess is about to hit the fan." I said back to him and lowered the radio volume. "Oh, come on. You know that's some pseudoscience nonsense," Ronnie shouted, as I expected he would. It was easy getting under his skin when it came to stuff like that. He had no tolerance for nonsense, and that's part of the reason why we got along so well. We had plenty of time to get to know each other while working the day's shift, and often walked around the zoo shooting the breeze while telling the visitors not to feed the animals, and occasionally dealing with an obnoxious or drunken patron. Everything changed the day after the first incident at the zoo. Several animals were found eviscerated in their enclosures, and some were missing altogether. Security was ramped up in response, forcing us to man the night shift until the police could figure out what had happened. Neither of us minded being reassigned, since our pay was slightly increased, and we wouldn't be dealing with the nasty heat in the daytime. Best of all, there weren't any visitors in the zoo. "I'm kidding, Nutty. Relax," I said, adding fuel to the fire. "Forget you all," Ronnie shouted and cut out. I walked underneath the awning near a row of snack stands, staying out of the rain. I felt bad for Ronnie, since there was nothing on his side of the zoo besides restrooms that would offer shelter from the rain. "Hey, Ron, why don't you hide out in the bathroom for a while until this stuff blows over? Give them a good cleaning while you're at it," I suggested. "Shut up," Ronnie replied in a whisper. "Oh, come on, I'm just trying to help," I replied back, laughing that I'd gotten under his skin again. "No, seriously, be quiet a sec," Ronnie commanded in a serious tone. In the time we'd worked together, I'd never heard Ronnie be serious about anything. I waited for what felt like hours for him to radio back. I was about to squeeze the call button when the crackle of radio static startled me. "Get over here now," Ronnie shouted frantically. "What is it?" I answered back. "Seriously, man, whatever you're doing, just drop it and get over here now. You gotta see this." Ronnie's voice wavered in the static of the radio. Though I was cold and soaked to the skin, I felt colder still when I heard him speak those last words. I'd never heard his voice waver like that. I'd never heard that undercurrent in it that couldn't be disguised. Fear. "Be over there ASAP. Sit tight." The radio crackled, and I headed from the shelter of the snack stands, back to the parked golf cart. The plastic roof of the vehicle did little to shelter the console from the pouring rain. Everything was soaked and dripping. I hopped in and turned the key, my hand shaking from the cold. I buzzed away in the silent vehicle, along the black pavement of the zoo paths toward the primate enclosures where Ronnie awaited. The grounds were empty and quiet, much too quiet. Why in God's name did we have to work on a night like tonight? Why couldn't we just stay in the office until this stuff blew over? And now this nonsense with the apes. The thoughts buzzed in my head, and more I began to weigh how much I actually needed this job. When I arrived at the baboon enclosure, Ronnie stood by the edge of the cage, his plastic poncho flapping in the wind behind him like some kind of comic book superhero. I slammed the brakes hard and brought it to a dead stop behind him, but he didn't turn around. The shrieking of the primates was frenzied, high-pitched, and perpetual, and set my teeth on edge. They couldn't have been too happy about being stuck out in this awful weather, but I got the feeling from what my partner had said it was something more than that. I hopped from the seat of the cart, and lightning flashed in the sky, followed by a boom of thunder, low, loud, and close. The baboons' shrieking intensified, and I felt like I was walking into that scene from 2001. I expected to see a giant black obelisk rising from the center of their cage. I came up beside my coworker. "Ronnie, what the heck's going on, man? What's got into them?" He still didn't turn his head. The pouring rain ran down his cheeks as he stared into the center of the cage. I followed his gaze and saw a swarm of the shrieking monkeys encircling something. They were feeding, tearing pieces of flesh and blood and ligament from an animal torso lying between them. Ronnie just kept staring his 1,000-yard stare. "It's human," he said slowly. "There's a human body in there." I felt ill as I glanced around the top of the enclosure. I figured that whoever's body was being torn apart by a frenzied troop of baboons had gotten in from up there. There was an altogether too short railing at the top that opened up into the main level of the park. During the day, people could come and watch the baboons play from above instead of below. A few times in the past, there had been a few idiots who decided that they wanted to climb the railing to play with the baboons. There was only one time someone had successfully made it into the enclosure, but the guards were able to rescue them before the baboons got to them. This person hadn't been so lucky. "What the heck are we going to do?" Ronnie said blankly, staring at a rather large baboon leisurely chewing on a handful of flesh. I stood unblinking and uncertain of the best course of action. Obviously, we couldn't go in. Getting between a wild animal and its meal is inadvisable. And really, there was no point. The person in there was deader than disco. Risking our lives for a corpse wasn't a reasonable course of action, especially because we didn't get paid enough for that. "We better call the boss," I said, turning toward the exit of the exhibit. "I think we should just call the cops right away," Ronnie said to me, as we made our way back to the small office where our phones were protected from the rain. The boss had told us clearly after the first couple of incidents that we should contact him first. He'd take care of it. Something about us not getting paid enough to deal with this stuff. He was right. Reminding Ronnie of this, he didn't seem pleased. He started quietly grumbling under his breath, spitting the rainwater from his mouth with every movement of his lips. Grabbing my phone, I sifted through to find George. After several rings, his wife answered the phone. Her quiet hello sounded groggy from being awakened. "Hi, Mrs. S., is George around?" "There's been another incident." My voice cracked. "It's pretty serious," she yawned. "Hi, Al. George said he was going into work tonight. Something about a problem with the security system. You haven't seen him?" Placing my hand over the receiver so she couldn't hear me, I spun around to Ronnie, who was looking a little pale. "You seen George tonight?" He simply shook his head. "We haven't. I'll keep an eye out." She yawned again. "All right, dear. You two be careful in that storm." The only option now was to notify the cops. I didn't like it, but there was no way we were going to go searching for George in the storm. Ronnie seemed relieved, more color flooding to his face. "I'll call them," he said. "All right. I don't want to, but I'll head back to the enclosure to make sure everything is secure," I said as Ronnie started dialing. The office was close by, and I could still hear the monkeys shrieking. I made my way to the top of the enclosure to double-check the locks on the doors. Realizing they were secure, I sighed and put my weight on the rail, tilting my head to the left in an attempt not to look down. My focus fixated on one of the trees, and that's when I noticed the piece of clothing that had been left behind. A few years back, George had gone on a trip with his wife. He came back with a red cap, which seemed to be superglued to his head ever since. My stomach dropped, and I sprinted back to the office. Flinging open the door, I yelled out to Ronnie. I think it was George. "Dang it, Ron." His hat was in the enclosure. Ronnie froze with his thumb hovering over the call button, staring into the space I occupied. He blinked. "No way." I sighed. "Yeah, way. I can hardly believe it myself. No way. George never went near those things. You know, those darn dirty apes. He hates them." His hat was hooked on one of the branches, with smears of brown and deep red. Apart from that, there was no way to identify the mess of viscera lying in the bottom of the enclosure, no. His hat was in there, Ron. He shook his head with a little too much conviction. "That don't mean a thing. Could have fallen off. Then maybe the wind blew it in there." Ron hit call and put the phone to his ear. I slumped in the chair next to him, barely listening to his requests for police and an ambulance. I shut my eyes for just a minute when the sound of the rain became cracks against the window. Hailstones fell and littered the ground with pale, icy beads. By the time Ron explained for the third time that we were on 5th and 8th, not 6th and 7th, the hailstones were as big as golf balls and slammed against the window, threatening to come straight through. The cries from the park changed from excited gibbering to panicked shrieks. The lemurs in the enclosure next to the office ran around trying in vain to hide under the trees. Hailstones crashed down against the bars, exploding into fragments. Some got through the gaps and hit the ground inside like grenades. The unlucky animals took direct hits, some reeling from broken ribs, some slumped to the ground with a bloody mess on their skull. The ones that found hiding places fought for the space, pushing smaller, weaker ones into the fray. Shoot. Ron hung up. I could barely hear them on the line. The dispatcher didn't hear a word of what I said. This storm is seriously messing with us. "I think we're in here for the night, Ron." As the words came out of my mouth, there was a crash above us. It thudded heavily like it would break through the roof. The office shook with the impact. Then there was another one, and another afterward. Ron and I both jumped out of our seats and stared up at the ceiling, expecting it to come crashing down on us at any moment. Those pieces of hail must be the size of freaking basketballs to make that noise. I said to Ron as we both went to the office door and into the administrative area. As we approached the window for a look outside, there were several more crashes on the roof. Neither of us said a word at what we saw when we looked out the window. Dozens of animal corpses littered the pavement outside the office as far as we could see. We couldn't tell what any of them were. Each corpse was a tangled mess of flesh and viscera. Broken bones ripped through skin and fur. They looked just like George's body in the baboon enclosure. Ron put his head down and threw up. I was too in shock to do anything else but stare ahead and watch as animals continued to fall from the sky. It's freaking raining all creatures, great and small, of God's green earth. Ron looked up at me, his face pale, and wiped the vomit from the edge of his mouth with his hand. He stared at me incredulously. The pounding on the roof continued above us, a continual thump, thump, thump. I stared out the window and watched the rain of animal corpses hitting the pavement. Body after body rained from the sky with the hail. Giant fleshy sacks of muscle and blood and grizzled guts exploded against the hard, wet surface of the zoo asphalt and splattered everywhere. "I'm worried the roof is going to come in," Ronnie said. His eyes were wild. "This is some end-time stuff we're dealing with right now, man." His proclamation was cut short by a sound coming from outside. It was a vicious, bone-rattling, monstrous squawk. It was deeper and louder than any boom of thunder I'd ever heard. "What the heck was that?" I said. "We need to get out of here." "No," Ronnie yelled. "What the heck's got into you, man?" "It's raining animals outside." I didn't care. I ran for the door and burst out into the cold insanity that was the storm. It was a wasteland of carnage, animal bodies strewn everywhere, and the unrelenting hail and wind pounded me. Then I heard it again, that animal sound, that scream, shaking me to the core and making a chill run up my spine. "Ah!" Ronnie yelled from behind and tackled me. We fell to the tarmac, and I looked just in time to see a giant hulking gorilla drop like a stone and explode into a puddle of gore right where we had been standing. "Holy cow!" I yelled over the thump of bodies hitting the pavement everywhere around us. "Thanks, man." Ronnie was frozen above me, staring up into the sky. "Ronnie?" I followed Ronnie's gaze. At first, I thought he was staring at the storm, then lightning flashed, and I saw what he was looking at. It was only for a moment, but whatever I saw was huge, flying on massive wings. Now that I knew it was there, I could see it turning round and round in the sky. It was circling the mess of meat that had just splattered behind us. I glanced down at myself and realized that Ronnie and I were covered in the gore too. "Ronnie," I choked out, trying to remain calm. "Ronnie, we have to get back inside." Ronnie still had his eyes glued to the sky. He was whimpering prayers to whatever deity he worshipped. "Ronnie, darn it." I stood up and grabbed his arm and began yanking him toward the building. "We need to get back inside now." I heard the creature getting closer, the wings shaking the air, warning that death was only a few yards away. I could feel the beating of the wings and the shifting of the air. It squawked again, and I dropped Ronnie's arm to cover my ears. I looked at Ronnie again. He'd finally come around and was standing. The squawk seemed to shake him loose from his paralysis. I took that chance to bolt for the door. "Hurry up," I shouted to Ronnie while he was still making his way back into the building. He slipped on the gore that covered the ground, almost falling over, but regained his balance as he bolted toward the door. A flash of lightning lit up the sky, and then there was the crash of thunder a moment later. Ronnie's eyes widened into pure terror. Another powerful squawk ripped across the air, making my eardrums feel as if they were going to burst. Whatever it was that he saw gave him a second wind, and he quickly made it back inside. I slammed the door shut behind him and twisted the lock into place. The door started to shake a second later, as if a group of people were hitting it with hammers. A sound of wood splintering rang out through the office, and an ear-piercing squawk filled my soul with fear. I had no time to think as the window next to the door shattered, and something flew into the administrative room. The impact must have dazed it, as it fluttered around on the ground, trying to regain its composure. I felt a tug on my arm, and Ronnie dragged me away into the security room. "Did you see that stuff?" I shouted, knowing darn well that Ronnie had seen it. There were 1,000,001 questions on my mind. My adrenaline rush wouldn't allow me to formulate the words that I was trying to say. I was hoping he would have some sort of answer that would put my mind at ease as to what that creature was. "The sky, it's full of them," Ronnie replied through chattering teeth. I couldn't tell if it was from being cold or from fear. "I only saw the huge one, and the one in the office," I said back, confused. "I saw them all when the lightning flashed. They're circling above us." "Hundreds of them," Ronnie explained. A cold shiver went up my spine. Ronnie sat down on a chair and put his palms to his face. He wiped away the blood that was getting into his eyes. I did the same, hoping to remove whatever I had on my face as well. Coco, Ronnie said, as if figuring out the answer to all our questions in life. What about Coco? I replied. Dude, that was Coco that splattered in front of us on the pavement, Ronnie answered with wide eyes, nodding his head in a daze. Yeah, there were a lot of animals out there. The whole freaking zoo is splattered outside, I replied, still not understanding where he was going with it. Coco is a 300-pound gorilla, Ronnie said, looking at me like I was an idiot. I really don't know how that fun fact helps us right now, I said, feeling irritated. Whatever the heck it was that dropped him from the sky has to be about the size of a darned bus to have done that. Ronnie shouted at me while tossing the chair to the side and pacing around the room. He opened the desk drawers and ransacked them until he found a can of mace and tossed it at me. So what do we do now? I asked, hoping to calm him down. We barricade the door, hunker down, and hope to God that they don't break through, Ronnie replied, while turning over the desk and pushing it against the door. I started to search the room for something else to add to our makeshift barrier and found nothing. We took our chairs and placed them against the door too. We both sat there listening to the thump, 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 and muffled squawks between the rumbles of thunder. Al, wake up, Ronnie said, shaking me out of my slumber. I didn't realize that I had fallen asleep. Between the sound of thunder and squawks, I didn't think I'd ever get to sleep, but my exhaustion must have went out at some point in the night. What's going on? I asked, wiping the sleep away from my eyes. The whites of Ronnie's eyes were bloodshot, and there were bags under his eyes. He must have stayed awake the entire night. It's morning. The storm is gone. There hasn't been a thump on the roof in hours. I think it's safe, but I don't want to chance going out there without backup, Ronnie explained, pointing at the mace on the floor next to me. We made our way out of the security office, remaining as quiet as we could. Ronnie led in front, holding an improvised spear made from a broom handle we'd found in the closet. I stayed behind him with the mace, ready to spray anything that came at us. As soon as we stepped out of the office door, the smell of rotting meat punched us in the face like we owed it money. I tried to hold back from vomiting, but the smell was too wretched. I threw up whatever I had in my stomach, and then we continued onward with our hands over our noses and made sure to breathe through our mouths. It didn't make it any better. As we exited the hallway and entered the administrative office, we were met with the sound of squawking birds. That almost sent me running back into the security office, but Ronnie held my arm and told me to listen. They were nothing like the squawking we heard the night before. We tiptoed to the shattered window, crunching over the broken glass, alerting the birds to our presence. A few turned their attention to us, then immediately went right back to enjoying their scavenged meal. They paid no mind to us as we took in the grisly view that the darkness of the night had hidden away from our eyes. Thousands of birds from miles around had smelled the stench of festering zoo animals and came to enjoy the buffet of leftovers the creatures from last night left behind. Entire carcasses were left behind that looked like they had been torn apart, but none of the meat was taken. Only the bones seemed to have been removed. Birds of all shapes, colors, and sizes pecked away with blood-smeared beaks at the carrion. Before leaving the safety of the office, we searched the skies for any sign of the creatures from last night. Aside from a few birds circling above, there was nothing threatening. We made our way out to the parking lot carefully to avoid slipping on the gore that coated the ground. Once I got my phone on a charger, I called for the police and told the dispatcher about what happened. I couldn't believe my ears when they told me that they would get to us in an hour or two. The storm had wrought havoc across the state, causing traffic accidents and bringing down power lines, making travel very difficult. All officers on duty were busy. Ronnie took the phone from me and tried to berate some sense into the dispatcher. But apparently, even if every animal on Earth was killed, the police would still be more worried about taking care of human life first. Looking back on it now, I can see their reasoning. But after spending the night in a security office, worrying about being lifted into the air and then dropped to my death by some monster, there was no reason left in the world. We waited an hour before an officer showed up at the zoo. As he stepped out of his car, he placed his hand over his nose and coughed at the smell in the air. It was beginning to warm up too. The smell would get worse as the day went on. The officer asked us what happened, and we had no choice but to tell him the truth. He didn't believe us until we offered him a tour of our newly renovated zoo. Once he finished throwing up, he called for backup. I imagine that the rest of the day must have been like that for everyone else who showed up at that horrific scene. It's been almost 12 years since the events of that horrible night. The zoo never reopened, and a month later, it was bulldozed, and the land was sold off to a company that built a warehouse there. Ronnie and I heard through the grapevine that the zookeepers and everyone else who worked there were told that it was closed because the owners had a change in morality about keeping animals caged up for human amusement. They were told that the animals were released into the wild or transferred to other zoos around the world. Any further inquiries led nowhere. The company offered very generous severance packages to the employees that lost their jobs. Ronnie and I were offered a substantial amount to compensate us for our troubles that night and to buy our silence. Non-disclosure agreements were a stipulation to getting our payouts and keeping them. Unfortunately, money talks, and it's very loud in the ears of a couple of guys who used to work security at a zoo. Plus, who was going to believe our story anyway? George's wife was the only loose end that the company had to contend with. She filed a missing persons report with the local police, and there was an investigation into his disappearance. The last anyone had seen of him was a security camera video showing him getting a drink at a convenience store and leaving the store, never to be seen again. George never turned up. It pained me to have to keep my mouth shut about it, knowing that she was suffering the entire time. Luckily for her, it was discovered later on that George had a life insurance policy through the zoo, and Mrs. S got a pretty huge payout. She soon went silent on the matter as well. A few months after George disappeared, she moved out of town, never to be seen or heard from again. Just to be safe, I changed the names of the people involved and left out many of the specifics in case anyone from the company's legal department happens to stumble upon this. After more than a decade, I doubt anyone even bothers thinking about that zoo anymore, except for me. And I'd guess that Ronnie may think about it often as well. There are still scars from that night that will last me a lifetime. The sound of thunder sends a cold chill down my spine and sends me running for cover in a panic. I've imagined seeing the outline of the mammoth beast circling in the clouds, waiting for me to come outside so that it can fly me into the air and drop me. The deafening squawk is the only thing that I can hear as I plummet to earth. My bones snap on impact, and everything goes dark, but I'm not dead. The smell of rotting animals awakens me from death. I see the birds pecking away with bloody beaks at the remains of splattered animals. I can't breathe. I can't think. Nothing feels right anymore. Once it passes, I'm fine again, and I can continue to live my life as I have all along, with only one lingering thought in the back of my head that continues to haunt me to this day. They're still out there. One day, those creatures will be hungry again, and the next time, they'll be bigger and looking to eat animals more like Coco instead of baboons. I vividly remember the day Duke disappeared. My family was spending the day at the lake next to our little bungalow at a quaint property in northern Ontario. All four of us were swimming and splashing around in the warm lake water, attempting to quell the blistering August heat. Our only neighbor for miles, an old retired police officer named Benny, was smoking on his patio. I waved to him, and he waved back. We were in the dog days of summer, and I was glad to be in the water. Duke loved the water as much as I did, and was still very energetic, being a large, middle-aged mutt. We would often throw frisbees and sticks off the dock, where he would take flying leaps into the blue-green lake. That's exactly what we were doing when he vanished. As I was drawing back my hand to throw the frisbee for Duke, who was anticipating a throw and getting ready to run, he suddenly whipped his head toward the woods. I, too, looked back at the rows of towering hardwoods and conifers, scanning them to see what Duke was looking at. It was nothing. At least to me. What followed was a blur. Duke suddenly bolted for the trees, barking and snarling while we screamed his name. I screamed at my parents to get out of the water and help me chase him. I even saw Benny spring out of his rocking chair to help us. I ran as fast as my 9-year-old legs could carry me into the dense forest, twigs and debris snapping under my feet. But you can only get so far in flip-flops before you trip. I tumbled to the ground, screaming and crying after accidentally scraping my leg against a sharp rock. My mom consoled me while I caught a glimpse of my dad running through the woods. It was a while before my dad and Benny came back. My dad had a somber look on his face. He didn't have to tell us what we already knew. But Benny looked shaken. I'm sorry, folks, but he ain't coming back," he said shakily. He took off his faded baseball cap respectfully and patted me on the shoulder before trudging up the hill back to his house. My whole family missed him, but to me, it felt like a part of me left when Duke did. He had been my best friend since I was young, and I even had a small photo album packed with pictures of the two of us. For a while, every night before bed, I would sift through the laminated pages of the photo album, reminiscing about good times and praying that someday he would come back to us. Deep down, I knew he wouldn't. A few months after Duke disappeared, my dad arrived home from work with a surprise. It was another dog. It wasn't elegant and athletic like Duke was. It was one of those tiny, white, yappy ones with crusty red goop around its eyes. My parents fell in love with it. Princess, they called her. But I didn't. I simply referred to her as the dog. I was bitter, so bitter, because I'd interpreted my dad's gesture of kindness as his own confirmation of Duke's absence. In time, I did grow to tolerate her. I had to admit, she was good company, and it was cute when she curled up by my feet. Life was going normally for us until Duke came back. It had almost been a year since Duke had disappeared. On this particular day, we were all cooped up inside, courtesy of the rain. I was engulfed in my book when suddenly I heard a bark. Not a high-pitched yap, but a deep, booming bark. I put down my book and rushed to the back door where I had heard it, Princess scuttling at my heels. When I peeked through the window, I nearly fell over. It was Duke, somehow. By this time, my parents had arrived. My mom rushed past me and whirled the door open, while my dad and I hung back, mouths agape. As my mom hugged Duke, I couldn't help but notice something off. I'd spent countless hours spending time with him and sleepless nights poring over photo albums. I'd familiarized myself with every spot, marking, and quirk of Duke's fur. One of his most striking features was a black spot over his left eye, which had appeared in almost every one of the photos. But standing here was Duke. His eye spot was now on his right eye. As a matter of fact, his whole pelt seemed to have been flipped. He was missing his collar, and he was skinnier than we'd last seen him, but it was him, all right. Well, that's what I'd thought. The first red flag was how Princess reacted to Duke. She was a yappy dog, all right. But when she saw Duke, she went ballistic, spitting and yapping like we'd never seen before. Princess barks at everything, remember? My dad told me, sensing my discomfort. She's probably just barking because he smells like the forest. And with that, he went outside to greet Duke. The barking must have alerted Benny, and he went outside to see what the commotion was. Once he saw what was going on, he darted back into his house and audibly slammed the door. When my parents came back inside, I tentatively stuck out a hand for Duke to sniff. He didn't wag his tail like I expected him to. All he did was quietly sit down. Then he heard Princess yapping from the other side of the room. His head swiveled, and he lifted himself and padded confidently toward her. Before long, He had her cornered. All he was doing was standing and watching her, yet Princess' eyes were bulging as she howled and yapped. A sense of dread was beginning to creep up my spine. But before anything happened, my dad whistled, and Duke lifted his head. With one last glance at Princess, he slunk away. The sense of wrongness didn't alleviate for the rest of the time Duke was with us. The second red flag was that Duke didn't eat the food we put out for him. Granted, it was food intended for small dogs, but it was still the same formula. Dogs are wired to eat everything they can get their paws on anyway, so even then it wouldn't have mattered. Not once did I see him eat. Every time we let him outside in the woods to relieve himself, he came back 20 minutes later, his white muzzle stained pink. I found it odd that my parents didn't think he was at risk of running away again. But since he didn't run, I never brought it up. They spent all their time with Duke petting him, coddling him, attempting to feed him, and playing with him. All this while completely ignoring Princess, as well as my objections. Something's different about him, I brought up during dinner one day. That's nonsense. What are you talking about? Said my dad. He's good, old Duke. He looked at the dog as if searching for approval. We ate the rest of dinner in silence. As the summer went on, Duke seemed to gain more and more influence over my family. At this point, it was just me taking care of Princess. It was up to me to feed, walk, and take care of her now, as my parents had completely neglected her. This dog wasn't the Duke I used to know. Every time he walked into the same room that Princess was in, she would scuttle away in fear and into my arms. I took to always being in the same room as Princess, just as a precaution. From what I didn't want to admit. But deep down, I think I knew. One day, Benny approached me while I was walking Princess. "You doing okay, kid?" Yeah, it's... I trailed off. Benny bent down to meet my height, his friendly blue eyes clouded with concern. "Be careful, kid. If you need any help, I'm right up here." Without another word, he turned and walked back into his house. When I came back from the walk, my mom announced that we were going to the store. Dad had figured out that Duke liked raw meat, and we had run out of it. As a matter of fact, we had run out of all other food in the house. But of course, in order to enter the grocery store, we needed to leave the dogs alone. I wanted to stay home and look after Princess, but my mom wasn't having it. "I don't know why you always insist on being around that dog," said my mom. "It's not healthy." "Look who's talking," I muttered. "We're going to buy a bunch of raw meat for a dumb dog." For that, she slapped me. Tears sprang from my eyes. "Don't you dare speak about Duke that way," she huffed. "Get in the car." Without another word, I did as she said and got in, leaving Princess behind with the dog. I couldn't stop thinking about Princess as my parents cleared out the raw meat section. The drive home was nerve-wracking, and the walk up the driveway to our cottage was dreadful. I could hear the whimpering even before the door was open. Heart in my throat, I whirled the door open and screamed. Princess was under the kitchen table, her leg bleeding profusely. No, it was gone. One of her legs was just gone. Curled up on the carpet was Duke, muzzle stained red. The rest of my family walked in. "Oh, the mess you've made. Bad dog," my mom said as she scolded Princess. She gave a pathetic whimper in response. This was my breaking point. "Stop," I wailed. "Are you guys blind? He tried to kill her. She needs to go to the vet." Yeah. "Duke, I have a snack for you." His ears shot up as my dad ripped open a package of ground beef. My stomach growled. I hadn't eaten all day, and the only food we'd bought was meat for Duke. I was furious. This darn dog was taking them over. I didn't feel safe anymore. "I'm leaving," I announced. "I'm taking Princess with me." Tears were streaming down my face, even as no one acknowledged me. I packed a few belongings and grabbed a towel to wrap Princess in. I remembered what Benny had said to me earlier that day. and I knew what I had to do. As I trudged down the dirt trail to Benny's house, thoughts collided with each other in my mind. Why were my parents ignoring me so much? Why didn't they care about Princess? Did they even love me anymore? The last one made me cry even harder. I reached the faded red door of Benny's house and knocked. He appeared a moment later, and when he saw me holding Princess with tears streaming down my face, his breath hitched. I knew this would happen. He muttered gravely under his breath, "Get in my truck, kid. We'll go get your dog some help." He unlocked his truck, and without another word, I climbed silently into the back seat. I watched the cloud-dotted sky turn into pale shades of pink and purple as we sped down the bumpy road. After a while, we arrived at a small house that seemed to have been converted into a veterinarian clinic. Benny took Princess in his arms and rushed in, yelling for help. I followed along slowly and sat down in the waiting room, sad and defeated, but too tired to cry anymore. After a lot of frantic pleading, Princess was to receive emergency care. A woman in a teal veterinarian's uniform carried her away. I sprang out of my seat. "Let me go with her," I begged. Benny guided me away. "She's gonna get help now, kid. It's in God's hands now." I popped back down and curled into a ball. Benny patted me on the back. A somber silence had appeared between us when I broke it by asking Benny something that I hadn't gotten a chance to before. "Benny, what did you mean when you said that you knew this would happen?" He tensed up, a guarded look crossing his face, then one of guilt. He exhaled a melancholy sigh. "Well, you see, kid, you know why I live alone?" he asked. I shook my head. "Well, I had family too once, Marjorie, and my son, James." A sad look crossed his face. "You remind me of him. We had a dog, too. A beautiful pointer named Max. James loved him, so he was all torn up when he went running away. But one day, about a year later, we find him standing at the front door. Something's wrong in those woods. It changed Max. He wouldn't eat the dog food we got him, only raw meat. James was happy to see him, but Marge was happier. I found it strange because the night I'd brought Max home from the pound, she yelled at me like she never had before." Benny chuckled wistfully to himself. "Well, since I was busy patrolling all day and night, I didn't notice it as much as I should have. James kept missing school, and I noticed he was thinner. I told Marge that she had to take care of her son, but all she did all day was spend time with the dog. I tried to do the best I could, but I was a terrible dad and a terrible husband. I should have helped my wife. I should have protected James." He exhaled. "I'm sorry," I said quietly, not knowing what else to say. Benny shook his head. "I ain't finished yet. You see, one day, me and my partner get a call. Some neighbors had called about a disturbance at my address. My partner was in the driver's seat, and I was the first one to get out of the car. When I walked in the house, I saw my boy in the middle of the kitchen, dead. The dog was eating him. Instinctively, I shot the dog. That's when Marge turned around with a knife. She lunged at me, and I shot the fatal blow. All 3 members of my family dead in one night. My mouth was wide open, and the full weight of his words weighed heavily on me. Was that to be the future of my family? Benny, that's terrible. I'm so sorry. I looked up at him to see a single tear trickling down his otherwise stony expression. I failed James as a father. I can't do the same with you, kiddo. After his story was finished, I felt my eyelids start to droop. I leaned on Benny's arm. "Good night, Benny." He was staring straight ahead, face emotionless. "Good night." When I woke up, the first thing I noticed was how much my back hurt from sleeping on a chair all night. But I wasn't cold. Benny had put his tattered flannel jacket over me as a blanket. I sprang up from my chair and yelped at the receptionist. "Where's Benny?" She jumped in shock. "He went to do some errands," he said. She got up from her chair and picked up a few items. "Take this, dearie. You must be starving." She placed a buttered bagel, a blueberry muffin, a banana, and a bottle of apple juice on the table next to me. She was right. I was starving. Food always tastes the best after you've been deprived of it. I ran my fingers over my ribs. I could feel each one protruding from my chest. This was the first time I'd been full in ages. The receptionist had informed me that Princess had made it, and that she was in the recovery stage. When I saw her for the first time, my heart exploded with love for Princess, and I hugged her gently. I smiled as she licked my face. I didn't know where else to go, so I played Scrabble with the receptionist for the rest of the day. I got to meet a fat cat named Mr. Cuddles, a rabbit named Twix, and I got to eat a hamburger for lunch. But all throughout the day, I kept wondering, when would Benny be back? At 3:04 p.m., my question was answered as Benny stumbled through the door. There was blood on his clothes. A couple of police cars were waiting outside. "Let's get going, kid." Although I didn't get the full story immediately, I came to know the full extent of what had happened eventually. Even though he wasn't part of the police force anymore, Benny still had connections with the department and to the people who knew what happened to his family. He gathered police officers and went to my house, where they found Duke eating the bodies of my parents. Benny shot him dead. I wept profusely for my parents, not for how they were to me in their final weeks, but for the people they once were. Benny assured me that they had loved me. There were not many people at the funeral, mostly townsfolk. Seeing as I didn't have any other relatives, the courts placed me in the custody of Benny after a lengthy court process. A few years later, he officially adopted me. Princess came to live with us too. Benny was proud of me when I went off to police college, when I got married, and when my wife and I had a child. As per his wishes, we held a small funeral for him. Life is generally good to me. I have a wonderful wife and an amazing daughter. Sometimes, on the bad days in the dead of night, I thrash in my sleep as visions of dead dogs and screaming people writhe in my nightmares. But when I wake, I look at my daughter sleeping in her cradle, and my wife hugs me back to sleep. I remember that everything is okay now. Predators are an uncommon sight where I like to go hunting near the Rocky Mountains. I wanted to see what exactly I'd be contending with during hunting season, so I decided I would place some bait fairly deep in the woods. Whatever took the bait would be captured on my trail cam. I drove to a heavily wooded stretch of a logging road and parked my truck on the side of the road. The fresh air was great to breathe in, and even from the road, you could hear the chirps of birds and insects. This area was new to me, recommended by a family friend. He claimed I'd see lots of bears here. I kept the bait a few pounds of meat slabs sealed up in a bag while I trekked into the woods with the bait barrel. I hiked in about 15 minutes from the road and reached a small clearing that I was satisfied with. I scanned the ground for any flattened grass, animal tracks in the dirt, and any sort of droppings nearby. I found some tracks that looked like a wolf had gone through here fairly recently. No matter, my gun and pepper spray were with me as well. I set up the bait rather quickly and fastened my trail cam to a tree. The camera itself was well hidden thanks to how the branches hung on the tree. I would get a clear view of whatever went for the barrel. My expectations were to find a bear with this barrel of meaty bait, but I'd be satisfied capturing photos of other animals like mountain lions, wolves, or even a wolverine that could probably smell the meat and come to investigate. My trail cam picked up something much worse. Just about a month later, I went back to retrieve the trail cam. After parking the truck, I had already begun finding some discrepancies from my hike here last time. There was an eerie silence that carried through the woods. No chirping, nothing. I could hear every step I took almost louder than before. Some people find complete silence tranquil, but I'm not one of them. I felt more alert on this trek. That alertness made the path to the trail can feel that much longer. The silence persisted as I finally saw my equipment in view. The barrel had tipped over and was scratched up. The stench of something like a carcass smacked me in the face. I got the gun ready, sure that I had to shoot something. There was no rustling in the bush, so I proceeded carefully. The bait was still there. Of course, it had begun to spoil. That was where the foul smell was coming from. Oddly enough, there were spindly hairs stuck to the bait. I plucked one off. It had to have been almost a meter long when fully unraveled. What kind of hair was this? Disappointed and still a little on edge, I hastily grabbed my trail cam and left everything else behind. I could hear something trudging through the trees in the distance, so I kept the gun at the ready as I left. It was somewhat persistent, as I could hear the sounds of grass being pressed down, shrubs rustling, and twigs and branches being stepped on for most of my way back. All the noises were distant but persistent. I felt watched. I picked up my pace and eventually got to the truck. The minute I slammed the truck door, I heard a strange yell in the distance. My heart skipped several beats, and I started up the truck despite the feeling of my blood nearly freezing. I stepped on the gas and made my way back home. I had about an hour's drive back to my home, and my thoughts raced over the eerie feeling. The fact that the bait wasn't taken, the strange hair, and that awful sound. Hopefully, it'd all be solved with the photos on the trail cam. At record speed, I darted into my condo and got the trail cam's photos loaded onto my computer. There were lots of photos, so I started from the top. A part of me wishes I hadn't. The first batch of photos were primarily just pictures of the bait, with no animals or anything. Strong winds, swaying trees, and things like that probably tripped the camera. These photos persisted for a few days. About a week or so in, there were photos of birds landing on the barrel and other small critters that I could see through the trees. There was even a nice buck in the area that walked through the clearing. It wasn't until the third week that I finally saw what I was looking for. A bear. A big one, too. It looked like it sniffed the barrel, but then the photos picked up something that confused me. The bear took off swiftly. I could see photos of the dirt and leaves being kicked up. There were a few incidents like this. A bear would investigate the barrel, notice something out of the camera's range, and then run off. I started to get an explanation from the photos about 2 days after the first incident, when I saw something I am still puzzled by. In one of the photos, wrapped around a tree, looked to be a human hand that wasn't there before. I reviewed the cluster of photos taken during one of the later moments. The bear sniffed the barrel, the thing's hand hit the tree, and the bear took off. The bear didn't even stand its ground. A few days of photos were uneventful until 4 days before I picked up the trail cam. I was both confused and terrified by what I saw on the camera. From out of the clearing, I saw what I can only describe as a hairy, naked man crawling on all fours toward the barrel at 4 a.m. The hair on its head was almost the entire length of its body. The thing was emaciated and moved abnormally slowly, judging by the photos. I almost leapt from my computer chair upon seeing it. There's no explanation for something like that to be in the woods at that time. It reached the barrel and began scratching it up. The swipes it took at the barrel were cat-like and swift. I took notice that when this thing stood up, it was at least 7 feet tall. It knocked the barrel over and began frantically pulling all the meat bait out of it. It held the meat in its hands and threw it on the ground. It cocked its head toward the camera, and I could see the shine in its eyes reflecting. This thing looked back at the meat and began rolling on top of it with its mangy body. It stood back up and unhinged its jaws to let out what I can only describe as a scream. My mind paired that scream with the sound I had heard while leaving, and I nearly lost consciousness. I wanted to stop looking at the photos and turn them over to the authorities. But what would they say anyway? I still had 40 photos to go. I took a few hyperventilating breaths and pushed onward. It attacked the barrel some more, and its attention then shifted to the trail cam. I think it may have noticed it because it began to stumble toward it. After taking several irregular steps, it peered down at the camera. I could see its warped face coming in from the top left angle of the photo. Its eyes were abnormally spaced apart, closer to that of a goat's, but not fully on the sides of its head. Its long hair swayed in what I assumed was either the wind or the result of its abnormal movements. Eventually, after investigating the camera, it crouched back onto all fours and scurried into the trees directly away from it. There were a few photos remaining of mundane activities, much like before this horrific encounter. Nothing touched the bait, and it was pretty clear why. If I had known that thing was out there, I would never have gone to get my trail cam back. I'm certainly never going back there, ever. I want to delete these photos, but a part of me thinks it's worth putting a case together for the sheriff or something. It was a close call. Who knows what would have happened if I had gone 4 days earlier to grab the camera? I probably wouldn't be here, able to write this. I have been sitting on this story for a while. I haven't spoken a word of it to any of my coworkers for fear of ridicule, but due to the current string of stories from the SRO, I finally packed up the courage to share. A few years ago, I did an aircrew survival training course with the Army, where we learned everything you would need to know to live in the woods for an extended period of time if you downed your aircraft. The course covered everything from wild edibles to signaling overhead aircraft for help. The final test was one of the most challenging and terrifying experiences of my life. We were to hike 10 miles into the woods, find a clearing, and set up camp. Sounds easy, right? With nothing but a combat knife, field ration, and a very basic med kit. We were told by our instructor that due to an incident the previous year with somebody succumbing to the tolls of being alone in the woods, a combination of loneliness, boredom, and the thought that you aren't going to be rescued can drive even the most confident outdoorsman mad. We were to remove our belts and leave them at base. We drove in a 3-ton-up a logging road to our location. We were each given a specific grid location, each at least 5 miles away from any other person. We were given instructions to hike to our location. Mine was almost an 8-mile hike through densely wooded marshland and radioing when, or if, we reached our location. I had to change my location because my grid left me in a pond. I camped on the shore instead for obvious reasons. I got my bearings, planned out what I was going to do for shelter, and settled in for my 5-night stay there, completely on my own. I decided, since the weather was good, and I wasn't planning on staying there for too long, that I'd opt for minimal shelter and focus more on food and water collection. Water wasn't hard to find. There was a stream just outside of my camp. I put all of my effort that first day into setting traps to catch small game, pitfalls, rabbit snares, and deadfall traps. I thought if I'm going to set traps, I may as well set something to catch me a deer. I crafted a swing spike. Essentially, I bent a strong tree branch back and attached several sharp spears to it, connected to a tripwire system. I was very proud of my work. It would have definitely taken down a medium-sized deer. Everything was pretty uneventful the first few nights. Aside from wolves howling in the distance, it was quiet. For the first time in my life, I heard nothing but the sound of the woods. It was surreal. On the 3rd night, I heard the swing trap go off. It made a tremendous noise when it hit the tree beside it, which was discouraging, meaning it didn't hit its target. I woke that morning late in the day. The sun was already high in the sky. The first thing on my mind was to check my small game traps. I hadn't had anything to eat since the 2nd night, and the only thing in my belly was water. I went to reset the swing trap and saw something strange. There was blood on one of the spears. The wound must have been deep. The blood covered the first 2 inches of the spear. I noticed something strange near the trap. What looked like a man's bare footprint. I hadn't taken my boots off outside the shelter, and there was nobody around for miles. I got a little uneasy knowing that someone was around and wounded. What was weird was that there was no trail of blood to follow, especially with a wound of that size. The trap would have hit him square in the hip. I decided to return to my camp and snack on some nearby cucumber leaf, a local plant that grows in the Canadian Maritimes. It's a broad-leafed plant that tastes like cucumber and berries. Suddenly, a wave of guilt washed over me. I may have killed an innocent wanderer or some weird hermit living in these woods, but I was given very strict instructions not to go more than 200 feet outside my grid bubble. I decided to radio in the incident to command. They told me somebody would look into it. 15 minutes later, I heard a chopper circle overhead for about 5 minutes, land about a mile away, and leave quickly. It must have been an air ambulance to pick up my victim or something. The fourth night was strangely quiet. No bugs humming, no wolves in the distance, no wind, nothing. It was the closest thing to silence I have ever heard. Out of nowhere, every hair on my body stood on end, as if the air around me had been electrically charged. I felt like I was being watched. Not just that uneasy feeling you get when you're alone in the woods. I knew I was being watched. A quick gust of wind blew over my shelter. The air was freezing cold. I could see my breath. The deer trap went off again. It didn't hit the tree this time. I'm scared stiff. I'm not leaving this shelter to investigate. Suddenly, something broke the silence. A cough unlike anything I've heard a person make before. It was almost mechanical, almost like the voice of someone with an electronic voice box. It was rhythmic, one cough every 2 seconds or so. The coughing was the only sound. No background noises chimed in from the woods. I psyched myself up and packed up the courage to look through the entrance of my shelter to see what was making that noise. Just outside my shelter was a bare foot with tattered jeans around the ankle. I was petrified. I curled back into my shelter, and for the first time in my life, I accepted death. I accepted that if whoever was out there wanted to kill me, he could. I cried myself to sleep that night. For the next day and night, I stayed in my shelter, too afraid of whatever was out there to leave. I was woken on the 6th day by my sergeant. It was past noon. He was worried I had been injured on my way back to the extraction point. On the hike back to base, I asked him about the chopper. He told me not to worry about it. I let it go for about 10 minutes before asking again. He noticed that I was genuinely concerned. It was a body recovery. CPL. Jay hung himself with a rope he made. You were friends, right? He asked me like he knew the answer was yes, and handed me a note. I tracked him to your site. I know I shouldn't have, but I did. He kept coughing and whispering in a language I had never heard before, but somehow understood. He wanted a soul. He told me to do this to save you. The man with black eyes wanted you. So my father used to own a cabin. In fact, he used to own a lot of different properties, which I suppose is just a roundabout way of saying that we grew up with money. Where things get a bit complicated is how he actually made that money. The line that he constantly fed us was that he was an accountant running his own firm in an office in the city. Long hours, lots of business trips. We never saw him much. And whenever we did, he always seemed tired, his eyes perpetually bloodshot, as if he were always trying to force them to stay open. He was sent off to prison right after I'd finished my first year of college. The sentence? 15 years for washing hundreds of millions of dollars for numerous cartels. 2 weeks after he'd been booked, my mother committed suicide. As it turns out, she'd been helping him out through the entire thing and was facing some time herself. I guess she didn't want to deal with all that and took the drastic way out. A few months later, the government had seized pretty much all his property. All of it except for that cabin in the woods. We decided to take the 30-minute walk over to the nearest rest stop, where I knew there was a 24/7 diner. So we went there, ate our meals, and on the way back, we noticed a burning smell in the woods, as if there was a bonfire raging somewhere nearby. Of course, that was a bit strange, given that it was around 2 a.m., but we didn't think too much of it at the time, and we kept walking. It was only when the smell continued to grow stronger as we got closer to the cabin that we understood something was very wrong. Soon it had become suffocating, and we could see the night sky tinged with orange in the near distance. I felt my heart drop into my stomach, and immediately I was sprinting, my worst fear realized as I reached the clearing where the cabin was located. Completely up in flames, plumes of dark smoke blending into the night. It was a mix of different emotions that hit me all at once, the combination of them creating a sense of dread so deep I hadn't thought it possible. After reeling myself in, I called 911, with the operator telling me that the fire department would be on their way, but wouldn't be able to reach us for at least 30 minutes. The four of us walked away from the cabin in silence, getting far enough that the smoke was no longer scratching at our throats. Around 10 minutes later, we noticed that the orange tinge in the sky had suddenly disappeared. And I mean suddenly. Like gone in a single blink. I thought I might have been hallucinating, but it was clear from their expressions that my friends were seeing something similar. Cautiously, we started making our way back toward the cabin, noticing that the smoke was no longer heavy in the air, having cleared up considerably. Once we reached the clearing, it had disappeared altogether. I looked ahead, my brain working overtime to comprehend the sight before me. The cabin was no longer on fire. Burned to a crisp, sure, but the raging, overwhelming flames that had been consuming it just minutes prior had somehow completely fizzled out. The four of us looked between each other, as if to confirm we were all still seeing the same thing. Using the flashlight on my phone to survey the damage, I found pretty much what I'd expected. Complete destruction. Absolutely zero hope of recovering anything. I started taking some deep breaths, trying to calm myself down when I heard Pedro yelling out from the other side, "Guys, where did this thing come from?" We all walked over to him. Nestled in the debris was the corpse of something, a monstrosity. It was a bizarre enough sight to put us into a near trance. What eventually snapped us out of it was the chanting. It was barely noticeable at first, slowly escalating in pitch until it was clear that there were several human voices shouting in unison. Their tones were animalistic, their words strung together with just the bare beginnings of a rhythm. It sounded like they were speaking English, though I could hardly make out anything they were saying. The strangest part, though, was how quickly it was getting closer to us. Definitely not a walking pace. It was more like a sprint. The four of us shared a quick glance between each other, and immediately there was an understanding. We ran like bats out of heck, tripping over branches and our own feet. But eventually, we reached my car, all of us scrambling to pile into it. As I was fumbling for my keys, the chanting had become deafening, to a point that hardly made sense. It sounded as if there were speakers lined up in a circle around us, all blasting that horrible noise. And the second I had put the keys into the ignition, things went silent. I found myself holding my breath as I looked up, my eyes slowly adjusting to the darkness, until what I was seeing was unmistakable. Several figures standing completely still at the edge of the woods, all human-shaped, but far too large to be people. All the air being held in my lungs flooded out with one big exhale, and I slammed the vehicle into drive and took a sharp turn before speeding the heck out of there, refusing to look in the rearview mirror until we had made it onto the highway. I drove until I had reached the rest stop, which was now hosting an absurd number of police cars. I parked, got out, and approached one of the officers, asking if they were there because of the fire. The officer shook his head. "Fire? No? Has there been a fire?" I explained the situation with the cabin to him, deciding to leave out the creature and the chanting for the time being. The officer nodded slowly, his expression remaining largely the same throughout. "All right," he said. "We'll look into it, and then give you an update in the morning. For tonight, just get a hotel or something. I can't tell you everything. I don't even know everything. But I think you should have the right to know the truth about your father. All of the stuff that's happened here tonight all of the mess that you've seen. It has something to do with him? He took another look around before continuing. Cartels, right? Was that the story they told you? It's not so creative. But I guess it doesn't have to be creative to be believable. Because the stuff he was actually mixed up in. You would not believe it unless you've seen it for yourself. What the heck are you talking about? I asked. Look, I have your number. I'll be in touch tomorrow morning. This is something I'm curious about as well. Maybe you can give me some answers. Point me in the right direction. But not here. So get out of here before people start noticing you. And stay safe. I didn't feel like staying in a hotel that night, so I drove back into the city, dropping everybody off before arriving back at my own apartment. Of course, I couldn't sleep that night, my eyes wired open into the morning as I waited for the officer to call. He still hadn't by the time noon rolled around, so I tried calling him instead. No answer. Eventually, I did receive a call from the police, telling me that my father's cabin had burned down and that it was due to a forest fire. I told them that wasn't possible, because there had been no forest fire, and that I suspected foul play and wanted it to be investigated. It's already been investigated, were the exact words that the officer told me. Don't worry about it. Just get in touch with insurance. Go over your options. And before I could say anything else, he had hung up on me. Emergency construction is what he eventually told me. After that encounter, I pretty much dropped trying to figure things out. Some weird things have started happening to me since. Every night, I swear I can hear a baby crying in the apartment across from mine. The apartment that I thought had been occupied by a pair of college kids who definitely do not have children. That officer who was supposed to call me finally did, a few nights ago. When I answered, I was met with dead silence on the other end. Nearly 30 seconds of it until the line clicked dead. There's an abandoned house sitting across the street from my apartment building, one that's supposedly been there for years because the development of the store meant to take its place keeps getting delayed. Somebody has started staring at me through its second-floor window. Whenever I catch them doing it, they're quick to close the blinds, so I can never make out any details. But I know that the moment I turn away from it, their eyes are back on me. I can't confirm that any of these things are related, or whether any of it has something to do with my father. I just know that I don't want to deal with it, and that I want it to end. It's raining again. To be honest with you, I'm terrified of rain. I never leave the house when it's storming outside. But to give myself some credit, I never used to be like this. I used to love watching the rain fall from outside the windows. But now, I always have my curtains pulled tight across the edges of the windowsill. I wish I could show you what made me the way I am, partly to warn you, partly to verify myself. But I can't. I can only write out my story like it's some sort of fantasy, as if it's just another bizarre story on the internet that deserves to be forgotten in a week. If you see it like that, then that's fine, but I won't forget. I'll never forget. In 2012, I was a 21-year-old college student. I was absolutely madly in love with nature and all things wild. I had spent my childhood roaming up and down tree lines, fantasizing about mythical creatures and fantastic monsters. Now there I was in 2012 as an adult, studying forestry with dreams of defending those tree lines and fantasies I held so dear. I was absolutely ecstatic when my professor announced an opportunity for some extra credit. He suggested that we spend a few days of our upcoming break walking along some trails and paths to remind ourselves why we were doing what we were doing. As an avid hiker, I knew of a hiking trail a few hours over from our town that offered plenty of room to walk with very little crowding. The only ones who really walked more than a few minutes down the trail were the park rangers, and the chances of seeing one of them on the ever-winding and expanding trails of the forest seemed small. "Hey, Lily, want to take a trip down to the preserve with me?" I asked as the bell finished tolling, signaling the end of the school day. The girl next to me, Lily, was a quiet and sweet girl. She had long brunette hair that stretched just past her shoulders and gentle green eyes. She was the type of person people admired from afar. Beautiful but silent. A passing joke or compliment would make her smile, but she'd very rarely comment back. To most, that would make them move on to the next person. To me, that made me want to be closer to her. We'd been friends for a while at this point. Whether or not any sort of romantic intent was had between us, I couldn't say. We just knew we connected on some sort of level. Yeah, of course. Just tell me when. She looked into my eyes with a soft smile on her face. I smiled back at her. I hoped this trip would turn out well. A few days passed. Lily and I spent our free time in stores, gathering food, supplies, and tents together. Soon enough, we were all packed up and ready to head out. We took my small car with our bags tied down on the roof and took the highway a few hours east. By the time we got there, it was mid-afternoon. Still plenty of time to walk, but also a bad time to find parking. There were plenty of people there, walking their dogs, setting up lunches, and walking the paths. I thought you said it'd be quiet? Lily asked with a slight snicker. I rolled my eyes in response. I'm sure these kids aren't planning on hiking a few days in. It'll get quiet, I promise. I spun around and began taking our large packs off the roof of the vehicle. For as big as they were surprisingly easy to carry. Lily slipped the straps over her shoulders and waited for me to start heading toward the park. As we approached the trail entrance, we saw a ranger loosely standing guard. You guys heading in? He asked. There was no hostility or caution in his tone. He was merely asking a simple question. Yeah, that's all right, right? I questioned the fit middle-aged man. Of course. Just let me know your names and take my card. If you need anything, call down to the station. There's a couple ranger shacks deeper in. Feel free to use them if you need to. Just make sure to clean up. The ranger gave a welcoming smile and handed me a small business card for the local ranger station. Thank you. Oh, and my name's Max. This is Lily. Lily gave a small nod at the ranger, and he nodded back respectfully. Well, Max and Lily, you enjoy yourselves out there. We'll be patrolling around, so if you see us, don't be scared to say hi. With those words, the ranger backed away from the entrance, and we began our trek. We spent half of the first day slowly walking in quiet appreciation. There's something so liberating about walking with no time limit. It's like all of the world's stress slides right off your back, and the only thing you have to worry about is yourself. In that exact moment, you're all that matters. No bills, no studies, no cares. Just avoid snakes and strange plants, and you're all set. It wasn't too long into our journey before the sun began to nestle itself behind the trees, and the warm but steadily dropping temperature of the late afternoon winds began sweeping under our sweaty clothes. Let's find a clearing to settle into, Lily said, her head tilting from one direction to the other, looking for a place to set up. I nodded in approval and saw a small opening further down the path, clearly made by others who had taken a similar trip. It only took a few minutes to set up our tents in the clearing and start a small fire. After all that walking and hard work, we were finally ready to be off our feet for a while. Lily plopped herself down on the opposite side of the fire from where I was sitting and pulled out a granola bar to eat. I felt a rumble in my stomach and pulled out one of my own. This place is really beautiful, she said, taking a large bite out of the bar. Yeah, haven't seen many animals yet, though. I unwrapped my food and placed it on my lips, ready to take a bite. I quickly glanced over at Lily and froze. In the increasingly dark forest, just off the trail, just behind Lily, was something about the size of half a football. It was cloaked in darkness, but I assumed it had to have been some sort of small critter. I began to squint my eyes, trying to focus on it, but whatever it was seemed to fade out of existence, going straight into the ground. Everything all right? Lily asked. I realized it must have seemed like I was staring at her with food half in my mouth. I laughed and shrugged, shaking my head softly. Yeah, sorry. I thought I saw an animal or something off in the woods. It was small. Could have just been a rabbit or something. It must have burrowed into the ground, though. My friend peered over her shoulder into the silent woods and looked around. I knew she wouldn't see anything. Whatever it was left as quickly as I caught sight of it. We ended up finishing our meal, extinguishing the fire, and climbing into our separate tents. I slept like a log. All that walking put me out like a light. It wasn't until the morning that I woke up. I stumbled out of the tent, nearly tripping on the small fabric ledge at the exit of my portable shelter. The hot and humid summer morning sun hit me like a pile of bricks. Just so you know, I think we need to watch out for snakes, Lily said softly while I was wiping my brow. I looked over to see her undoing the tent supports from the forest floor. Did you see one? I asked, bending down and following suit with the camp cleanup. I think so. I heard something rubbing on the bottom of my tent last night. I opened my eyes, and the indents on my walls looked like a pretty thick snake trying to wiggle its way in. She didn't seem bothered by the potential late-night visitor, so I kept her warning in mind but continued on. As our journey went on, we realized that every step we took brought another blotch in the sky. Somehow a storm was brewing overhead that none of the forecasts we had watched had warned us of. How much longer until it rains? Lily was interrupted by a large thunderclap nearby in the clouds. I felt the earth tremor below us before a few raindrops began falling from the dimly lit sky. Thanks, Lily, I said, arching my head toward her direction. She scoffed, and I laughed. The rain was little more than a small drizzle at that moment, but it was clear it was going to get worse. Let's hurry and find a place to set up. I watched as she began to increase her pace, slowly moving from a walk into a jog heading deeper down the trail. I followed suit right next to her. For a while, it seemed like we weren't going to find a clearing anytime soon. We were already on the verge of being considered undoubtedly drenched, and to our luck, at that exact moment of thought, another strong explosion of thunder erupted from above. This time, the floodgates were opened. Rain began to fall with a purpose, and with enough force to erupt on impact, splashing everything nearby with the drop's watery contents. "Hey, right over there!" I heard Lily yell out, just barely audible through the thunderous rain. She was running off the main path down a small side trail nearby. I looked at where she was heading and saw a small cabin. I ran off the path with her. With each step, more and more mud thrust itself against my legs. I increased my speed, hoping to catch up to my light-footed friend, but something caught me off guard. The tip of my foot slid underneath something, and my momentum carried me downward, face first into a mud bath. For a few seconds, I was dazed, just lying down in the runny muck pit. I eventually looked down at my feet and saw what looked like a thin tree root, also caked in dirt, erupting out of the ground. But as my eyes stayed on the root, those initial assumptions fell to the wayside. The shimmering of the mud was what made me realize that whatever this object was, it was moving just beneath the mud. Then it clicked in my head. The snakes Lily had brought up. I had just tripped over one of them. I felt a shiver cross over my back, and I jolted back up to my feet and continued on my path, abandoning that snake behind. Without another incident, I made it to the cabin doors and burst inside, finally free from the hurricane-like storm. "Wow!" A familiar voice rang out in the shack. I looked over to see a drenched, but otherwise clean Lily staring at me with an amused smile on her face. "Decide to have a wrestling match out there?" "Haha, funny," I said, looking down at myself. Mud was dripping off just about every pore of my body. "I think I met one of your snakes you mentioned out there. It decided to trip me." "Oh, really?" Lily said as she grabbed me and turned me around, searching the pack on my back for something to help me clean up. "You were right. They're pretty thick. I wonder what kind they are. I can't imagine them being venomous, being that wide." I felt the hands of my companion yanking fabric out of my pack. I took some time to look around the cabin as Lily pulled the towels free. It was wooden, old, and completely empty. There was a cooking stove off to one side, but other than that, it looked very sparse. Clearly, it was only meant for a quick one-night stay. Here, get yourself cleaned up. I turned back around, and Lily handed me a bundle of towels. I immediately wiped off my face and brow. The dirt was already starting to dry and stick to my skin. "Thanks," I replied as she began setting up her things. I put my pack down against the door and walked over to a window, still wiping myself down. I watched as the rain continued its assault on the earth, the dirt running like rivers down the valleys and trails, both natural and man-made. "It looks terrible outside," I remarked. I heard a small groan of acknowledgement come from behind me. I let my eyes trail over the forested wetland to the path we had taken to get up there. My body locked up when I saw something right where I had tripped. Something was protruding from the ground like a small pillar. I rubbed the inside of the window fruitlessly to clear off the fog and obstructing rain. I could barely make out what looked like a thick, partially submerged branch, broken off on one end with small twigs splintering off skyward. "Hey, come and look at this," I called out to Lily, who was still fumbling around with her bags. "Is it the snake?" she asked, rising to her feet. "I don't think so. It looks weird, though." I watched the mud-coated object get hammered by rain as Lily approached and peered outside. "Is that a broken tree root?" she suggested. I could only shrug. Whatever it was wasn't moving. "Wait," Lily chimed in again. "Look at the color." As more and more of the rain ran down the object, the less obstructed by mud it became. I narrowed my eyes, pushing past the raindrops on the window, and noticed exactly what Lily was talking about. Whatever was under that mud was a pale shade of gray. "Oh my God!" Lily gasped and grabbed her mouth. "What is it?" I turned and looked at her, my eyebrow raised in confusion. "Look at the end of it," she said, holding her breath. I turned my gaze back outward and focused in. I felt my heart drop. Fingertips. It was an arm reaching out of the ground, still as the grave. "Oh my God," my voice wavered slightly. "We should call the Rangers and get them out here. Where's their card?" she asked, her hand extended toward me. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a wet but legible business card. Without hesitation, Lily snatched it out of my hand and began dialing the number. "Hello, I'd like to report something on one of the trails." She paced back and forth on the squeaky cabin floors. I turned and kept my gaze on the hand. It looked petrified in place, fingers eagerly reaching toward the sky, letting the water rush over it. "We're at," she began to stutter. "We're at, I heard the voice on the other side of the phone chirp up, and Lily nodded. "Hey, Max, can you take a step outside and tell me what number's next to the door?" I peeled my eyes away from the hand. I felt an increasingly oppressive air pressing its way inside the cabin. I shook my intuition away and walked to the door. I opened it up and stepped outside. I peered toward the arm and could see it more clearly without the blurry window between us. It was hairless, smooth, and the fingernails seemed clean and trimmed. The water that gushed over it almost seemed to vanish on impact, as if it were some sort of sponge. I had to force my eyes away from it to view the number on the wall. 17. I took a deep breath, repeating the number in my head before the sound of a loud clap echoed from behind me. I jumped slightly, on edge. I turned back toward the direction of the arm and saw nothing in its place, just the mud quickly running down the trail. I swallowed hard and rushed back inside. The number's 17, but I think the arm fell back into the mud. It's not there anymore. Lily's eyes went wide as she relayed that information to the dispatcher. It wasn't too long until she pulled the phone away from her ear and hung up. They told us to stay put and that this storm's not going to pass anytime soon. They said they've got a ranger on the way and the police have been informed, but it might take them a while to reach us out here. I bit my lip and looked back outside toward the empty path. I hope it didn't get dragged away by the current, I mumbled. Lily came up right beside me, joining me at the window. I'm sure they'll be able to follow that mud slick down to wherever it goes. On the bright side, that rain cleaned you up a bit. She gave a reassuring smile, and I looked down at myself. My clothes were still riddled with mud, but the rain on my skin seemed to have washed away most of the dirt. I guess that's always a plus, I said stoically. Come on, Max. Let's make ourselves at home at least. I'll just lock the door in case, well, you know. Her voice trailed off. In case there's a killer out there? I mumbled at her as she walked over to the door and flipped the lock. She turned around and averted her eyes from my gaze, choosing instead to continue her mission of getting set up. After a few minutes of silence, we had our food laid out in front of us. We had agreed that once the ranger got there, our little expedition was over. We had seen more in just the past 2 days than we could have in a lifetime. Let's eat and try to get some sleep, I said, chowing down on some extra rations. Lily nodded and joined in on the feast. With full stomachs, we set up for bed. I noticed my friend kept looking out toward the darkened windows. I could feel tension in the air. Everything all right? I asked. Lily shook her head dismissively. I just feel weird, like I'm being watched. I'm sure it's nothing, but just to be safe. She ripped off her pillowcase and then mine before walking over to the windows and draping them over the glass as makeshift curtains. I just don't want anything looking in at us while we sleep. I don't blame you. I made my way to my bedroll and pillow without a case before lying down, trying to get comfortable. Lily did the same. It was a few hours into the night before I heard Lily's hushed voice. Max, wake up. Do you hear that? I opened my eyes, less groggy than I expected, and met Lily's gaze. She was staring at the wooden door of the cabin. I spent a few seconds watching the door before I lightly saw the handle jiggle. Someone was trying to get in. What do we do? Lily asked. I was speechless. Maybe it's the... Our whispered conversation was interrupted by a loud knocking coming from the other side of the wooden door. Bang! Bang! I jumped to my feet. It's got to be the cops. I began my slow, meticulous walk to the door. Who's out there? Silence. Hello? I yelled again. Abruptly, the banging started again, loud enough to drown out my voice. I took a step back from the door and knelt close to the ground. Each impact on the door rocked the wooden frame of the small cabin. I watched as one of the pillowcase curtains began to slowly slip off the window. No, Lily whispered, tears in her eyes. I rushed over to the window, just as the fabric fell, and was met face to face with the darkness outside. The banging on the door stopped suddenly. I very carefully knelt down and grabbed the fabric in my hands to toss it back over the window. Thud. Appearing out of the darkness was the palm of a hand. It slapped the window with a heavy force. I could only see the pale palm in the shroud of blackness outside. I quickly threw the pillowcase back on the window and backed up to Lily. She was shivering, her eyes wide with fear. That was the hand, Max. That was the hand that was outside earlier. I felt my heart drop into my stomach. I wrapped my arms around Lily, as much for my comfort as hers. Thud, 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 thud. The wet palm of the hand kept slapping against the glass. I could hear ripples of cracks spreading along the window pane. I held on to Lily as she balled up and kept my eyes focused on the pillowcase covering the glass, hoping it wouldn't fall and expose that lifeless arm again. With one last thud, it stopped. A light shone through the fabric of the window, mere seconds after the attack halted. I could hear the struggling sounds of wheels rolling up toward the cabin. I let out a sigh and a prayer that the Rangers had finally made it. With the sounds of the wheels stopping just a few yards away, I finally heard a voice call out from the void outside. Lily? Max? You in there?" The voice sounded familiar. It was the ranger from the day prior. I slid to my feet, dragging Lily with me. "Yeah, we're inside, but someone's out there," I yelled. I rushed over to the door and opened it to see the ranger standing stiffly in the middle of the small opening in front of the cabin. He was facing us, but the light from his rover coupled with his hat covered his body in intense shadows. His posture seemed rigid. "Come out of that box, and we'll get you home," the ranger said. His voice seemed different this time, disjointed from his body. I stayed quiet. Something was very wrong here. "Step out of there. Now." The voice grumbled, unrecognizable from earlier. "Are you all right?" I called out, little more than a whisper. "Of course I am. Can't you see my smile?" The ranger tilted his neck backward. His hat slipped from his head, allowing the light from behind him to illuminate his face. His eyes were wide and full of both pain and fear. His lips were quivering in shock. I backed farther into the doorway and watched as two impossibly long fingers trailed their way from behind the ranger's head and made their way across his cheeks to his mouth. They slid inside with little resistance and began pulling his lips outward in a mockingly gruesome smile. Then they kept prying. I watched as his lips strained under the force of the fingers inside his mouth. His lips became white with stress before a shower of red erupted from his mouth, parting the centers of his lips like sliced meat. "I'm so perfectly happy," a voice called out from just behind the ranger, its voice thick and unnatural. I looked for the source and froze. There, right next to the ranger's feet, was a half-submerged human face dug deeply into the mud. Its black, cold eyes shone from some unknown source. Whatever this was, it was a monster in the strictest definition. Its gaze was so vastly separated from humanity that there was no common ground between us. As I locked eyes with this thing, human in shape and devilish in eyes, I saw the ranger fall into the mud. Just behind his head was a long spider-like arm stretching out of the ground, seemingly changing its size and shape as if it only faintly followed the laws of this reality. The ranger's body twitched and spasmed on the ground as more and more lifeless hands began to slither out from the mud, wrapping themselves around his body. I was so thirsty, but now I'm so very hungry. The submerged head called out unblinkingly toward me. Without another warning, the ranger's body was ripped under the earth and devoured by the mud. The ground where he had been shifted and bubbled over like a small eruption. The creature's eyes stared at me with a deadening gaze. It was observing me. I let out a small chirp from my mouth. Without changing expression, the head effortlessly started gliding through the earth toward the cabin, fingers and arms popping out from the ground around it like fins from a shark. I had stored enough courage to slam the door shut and lock it before running back over to Lily, who had seen the whole thing. "What is that?" she asked, her voice trembling. I shook my head and slumped down next to her. "I don't know." We sat in silence until the sounds of scratching came from below the floorboards. Hundreds of fingers tearing away flesh to the bone, trying to burrow their way upward. All we could do was sit in the corner farthest away from the windows and pray they didn't get to us. That night, we watched as the floor pulsed upward and downward as the foundation began to crumble. Those arms were going to drag us and our wooden coffin down into the earth. I didn't know what to do. I sat there as the floor cracked open and mud crept up through the seams of the boards like blood flowing from a vein. I sat waiting to die, but Lily had other plans. She grabbed my hand and yanked me to my feet. She stared at the door for a split second before sprinting off with me in tow. She burst open the door and ran toward the ranger's vehicle. Luckily for us, the ranger never shut it off before the earth took him down. We both hopped onto its seat and zipped off down the path from where we had come. I hazarded a glance back toward the cabin to see it crumbling into the ground, but there was something else there. Still half submerged on the path, mere yards away from us, was that unblinking head. Its black eyes shone, dead set and emotionless, on our escape. We kept driving and driving for God knows how long, until we ran into other rangers who were on a scouting mission to find us and their missing comrade. We told them everything we could, but the looks of disbelief said enough. We were labeled as emotionally distressed and unreliable witnesses. The powers that be listed the disappearance of the ranger and the cabin as accidental, caused by a mudslide. Now every time it rains, I wonder if somewhere out in the woods, a single head peers out onto the trails, waiting for someone to pass by. A million hands waiting just below the surface to drag them down into the earth.